You know, Alice and I are always looking to be more healthy, and we were just talking about how fasting is one of the best ways to do that. But it's so hard. But the great thing about Prolon is that's not what you're doing. It's not that you're not eating for 5 days. Instead, you're using their science-backed program to convince your body you're fasting.
You guys, this 5-day program really is amazing. It comes beautifully packaged and it does all the thinking for you. Each day is its own box. And by following their program, I know I just feel so much better. And I can't wait to experience Prolong Next Gen and continue to see results. For a limited time, you can be first in line to experience the new Next Gen at special savings. Prolong is offering the Prosecutors listeners 15% off site-wide plus a $40 bonus gift when you subscribe to their 5-day program. Just visit prolonlife.com/prosecutors. That's PROLONLIFE.com/prosecutors to claim your 15% discount and your bonus gift. prolonlife.com/prosecutors.
On the Jordan Harbinger Show, you'll hear amazing stories from people that have lived them, from spies to CEOs, even an undercover agent who infiltrated the Gambino crime family. You're about to hear a preview of the Jordan Harbinger Show with Jack Garcia, who did just that.
My career was 24 out of 26 years was solely dedicated working undercover. Now I walk in, I'm in the bar. Now there's a barmaid there, good-looking young lady. She's serving me a drink. Hey, what would you like? Usually my drink was give me a Kettle One martini, 3 olives, glass of water on the side. I finish the drink. The guys come in. I'm going to go in my pocket, take out the big wad of money. Bam, I give her $100. If you're with the mob, I say, hey, Jordan, you're on record with us. That means we protect you. Nobody could shake you down. We could shake you down, but you're on record with us.
For more on how Jack became so trusted in the highest levels of the Gambino organization, check out episode 392 of The Jordan Harbinger Show.
This episode is brought to you by Progressive Insurance. Let's face it, sometimes multitasking can be overwhelming, like when your favorite podcast is playing and the person next to you is talking and your car fan is blasting, all while you're trying to find the perfect parking spot. But then again, sometimes multitasking is easy, like quoting with Progressive Insurance. They do the hard work of comparing rates so you can find a great rate that works for you, even if it's not with them. Give their nifty comparison tool a try, and you might just find getting the rate and coverage you deserve is easy.
All you need to do is visit Progressive's website to get a quote with all the coverages you want, like comprehensive and collision coverage or personal injury protection. Then you'll see Progressive's direct rate, and their tool will provide options from other companies all lined up and ready to compare, so it's simple to choose the rate and coverages you like. Press play on comparing auto rates. Quote at Progressive.com to join the over 28 million drivers who trust Progressive. Progressive Casualty Insurance Company and Affiliates. Comparison rates not available in all states or situations. Prices vary based on how you buy. I'm Brett.
And I'm Alice.
And we are the Prosecutors. Today on the Prosecutors, we continue our look at the Leo Schofield case. Hello, everybody, and welcome to this episode of The Prosecutors. I'm Brett, and I'm joined, as always, by my Einstaka co-host, Alice.
Beautiful, Brett. That's not what I think it means, but I'm going to take it to mean Einstein-esque co-host.
Well, it means unique, and Einstein was unique. It's Icelandic. It's from Maria. Thank you, Maria.
Oh, thank you.
I don't know.
That was very good. Have you been to Iceland? It is
I have not.
Incredible. You should probably go before it. I think it's gonna melt into the ocean at some point, like in the next 100 years.
Well, they're having all those volcanoes and stuff.
It's true.
Yeah.
It's true. Iceland is where I one of the episodes previously, I was talking about how I swim in the Continental Divide and thought about how if
that's right.
went into cardiac arrest, I'd sink straight to the bottom. It would have been in Iceland.
Well, we're all glad you didn't, Alice. We're all glad you didn't. Because if you had, you wouldn't be here to talk about Leo Schofield. For the 5th episode, still talking Leo. There's so much to talk about. I mean, when I put down 8, I was like, I don't know if we'll get to 8. Now I'm like, yeah, we'll probably get to 8. And we've really been going through this trial step by step. And for those of you who wanted a deep dive, ask for deep dives, talk about how you want deep dives. Well, we're doing deep dives. And we're doing a deep dive here. And today we're going to start talking about some of the witnesses in this case that are pretty bad for Leo. We're going to do a lot of evidence. I don't know how far we'll get, but we're definitely going to talk about some witnesses who did not help Leo's cause. And the one thing I'll say about trials, there really are ebbs and flows in them. And there are really good days and there are really bad days. And there are really good witnesses and there are really bad witnesses. And there's witnesses that you think are going to be good that turn out not to be good. And so the way you're seeing this go was sort of, it seems like, oh, this is a good piece of evidence for him, and this is bad. That's how it pretty much goes, and that's how you see it. And you kind of have to just ride the wave all the way till the end, and only then make a decision. That's one of the reasons they tell juries, don't make a decision until you've heard all the evidence. As hard as it is, try and keep an open mind until you've heard all the witnesses and all the evidence. And that's what we're trying to do here with Leo Schofield, and I hope you guys are doing the same thing.
Yes, indeed. And you know what? By the way, this is what happens during trial, right? We've said before that trials are boring, and they are, except when you zoom out and instead of looking at the trees, you look at the forest that is the trial. And it is incredible how many ebbs and flows there are within a trial. And it truly is, until it can be the skinny lady who sings. You don't know what's going to happen at the end, especially because these longer trials, these impressions can change day to day. But over time, your impressions of the previous testimony begins to build on each other and it all becomes very interwoven. So this is very expected in any trial, to have very good days for your client, to have very bad days. You, of course, want the bad days to be interspersed with good days and so on and so forth, that it's better to have no bad days. But just know that it is a roller coaster of a ride when you are litigating a trial, because some days you get out of there and you're high-fiving each other and on a complete high because it feels like there's no way you can't win. And then the next day you get like a devastating blow and it could be just one statement from one witness. And
you're going to see some of that today. I've got to imagine these were some difficult days for Leo. But let's just dive in and start with somebody who was probably a bad witness for Leo, but actually kind of falls apart, and you don't really think about that much when you think about this case or hear much about this person. It seems like the prosecution didn't really rely on them. But Thurman Toole. Toole would testify that he and his wife were driving down Highway 33, which is around the little road that ran off where Michelle's body was found, is off of Highway 33. And they were around the place where Michelle's body would be found. And he said he saw a white truck, perhaps a Ranger, sitting on the side of the road. He saw two men come out of the wilderness, which he thought was very strange. Now, it was nighttime, but he thought they were under 30 years old, with dark hair and around 170 pounds. The next day, he was driving down the same road and saw police cars on both sides of it. While at McDonald's, he read a story about Michelle's murder and called the police. The prosecution would speculate that these two men were Leo Jr. and Sr. dumping Michelle's body. But there are a couple problems. And in fact, if I'd have been the prosecution, I wouldn't even bothered with Thurman. So Michelle goes missing the night of the 24th, and her body was found the afternoon of February 27th. And that would mean that Leo and his father, if Thurman is correct, were dumping the body on the 26th. And then you have to ask yourself, where was she in the interim? And how does that line up with the pathologist report that she was in the water 5 to 10 minutes after her death? Moreover, even if one of the descriptions matches Leo, the other does not match his father, who certainly wasn't under 30. And then there's the assumption that they were dumping a body. There's a strong argument that Michelle was killed at the location where her body was found. There's blood in the dirt. We're going to talk about this more. And there's chains strewn along the path where her body was dragged. And that's important because she was dragged. And that doesn't make a whole lot of sense if two men were moving her. So I kind of feel like Thurman is one of those witnesses who doesn't do a whole lot for you. sort of a vague description that kind of matches the truck, kind of matches them. But you just got to wonder if he saw something random and that translated for him into must be connected to this murder.
Yeah, I think that's right, Brett. I mean, at first blush, it sounds interesting, but the descriptions not meeting Leo Sr. and Leo Jr. are actually less problematic for me because people missee things all the time. More problematic for me is where was Michelle's body for 2 days? And those of you thinking, well, maybe they held her for 2 days and then killed her. That's absolutely not what happened. We know that she had been deceased for days by the time they found her body. And even for some reason, if they could not ascertain the time of death and that she was killed later than the 24th, there was absolutely no way that Leo Jr. could have done it because he was absolutely under scrutiny at this point. He's going to the police. Everyone is alerted to the fact that she's missing. You wouldn't kidnap someone, keep them missing, and then kill them 2 days later when all the spotlight is on you. I mean, everything about Thurman's testimony as it relates to this particular case kind of falls apart. So he's kind of just a not very helpful witness whatsoever. He just doesn't fit in. And you have that a lot when people see the news about something that is their town or somewhere they go by all the time. They want to be helpful. They're not necessarily manufacturing something, but he drove by something the day before. It meant nothing to him. He saw police cars the next day and he's thinking, wait, I might be able to help. That's probably what happened. And like you said, Brett, if I were the prosecution, I would have kind of looked at all this. There's really no external factors that can really corroborate what he's saying, and it doesn't fit into any timeline, certainly not the time of death and the manner of killing, because you wouldn't kill Michelle and just keep her somewhere. Where did the blood come from? Because we'll talk about that blood, but there was a lot of blood near where she was dumped.
And the fact that they have the LaFoons, who we're about to talk about, I think is even more reason to leave Thurman out of it, because you don't want to confuse things. If you didn't have anybody putting anyone resembling Leo anywhere near the dump site, maybe use him. But you do have those people. And I don't know. I just feel like it was something we wanted to mention. But if you ever see that on Reddit or anything, I don't find his testimony to be very powerful at all.
No, I think that's right. And you've already touched on this, but the drag marks on Michelle's back has always kind of stuck with me because it's a very visceral thing, right? You can imagine the terrible 26 stabbings, and then kind of in this heat of there's blood everywhere. She's probably barely breathing, about to expire, and her killer grabs her and starts dragging her to cover up what he's just done. And it's just devastating because she's being treated like a piece of trash as something horrific has already happened to her. And you do that because a body is heavy. We talked about this in the last episode. And she is not able to move because she's about to die. And so one person probably can't lift her. And so they're dragging her. If you have two people dumping, you've seen this in lots of TV shows. One person gets the head, one person gets the feet, and you kind of swing them over. It's a lot more effective. It happens a lot faster. No drag marks on the back. Nothing falls out of pockets. And you can also get in and get out quickly. When you're dragging someone, it takes time. It's a lot of work. It is not the best way to dispose of a body, right? Because you're leaving a lot of evidence along the way as well. So there's Thurman. I think that's it. I think that's all the time we really need to spend on him. But someone very interesting is Mary LaFoon. Mary LaFoon stocked the coin-operated newspaper boxes that used to be on every street corner. If you grew up anytime before the aughts, I would say, you probably remember these newspaper boxes. You put in like a quarter and you press and the door opens and there's that next day's newspaper, and you take out one paper and close it back up. By the way, talk about like the honor system back then, because I guess you could take every newspaper in the thing, but better times, I suppose. Anyways, because papers go to print kind of in the middle of the night for the next morning when people read the news, stocking of these newspaper boxes happens in the dead of night. And this is exactly Mary's position. And she usually finished up her work stocking these newspaper boxes between 3 and 4 o'clock in the morning. Now, on this night, she was driving down 33 when she saw the orange car on the side of the road with a blue pickup truck behind it. Now, she'll say that it was foggy, and although she saw some people there with the cars, She didn't recognize them. She said there were 2 men outside and what looked like a woman sitting in the passenger seat. Based on when she normally picked up her papers and the fact that it was foggy out, she thought that night it was probably around 3:30 and 4 as she was moving more slowly due to the fog. Again, we've talked about times, and Mary, you can tell from her testimony, doesn't say that she looked at the clock. There was some reason she knew it was 3:30 or 4 o'clock. She's basing it on how she normally operates. It doesn't mean this night wasn't out of the ordinary. In fact, she recognizes tonight is probably out of the ordinary because of the fog, but she doesn't actually know what time. And this is interesting because Randy, her husband, also testified. And he actually speculated that when she saw these cars on the side of the road on 33, it was more like 4 or 4:30 a.m. And he didn't have much to say about the people on the side of the road, only that there was an orange car. Otherwise, his testimony generally jives with Mary's, other than that time, which is about a difference of an hour. So if Mary's sighting is accurate, this would be the time of the dumping of Michelle's body. If Mary is right about the time, then the people around the car could be Leo and possibly his father. But with a change of about an hour, if Randy is right about the time, then the people are probably not Leo. Now, if there's a change in time of about an hour, so if Randy is right about the time, then we know the people who are seen next to the cars are probably not Leo Jr. and Sr. And that's because Leo Jr. was back at the Andersons' home by 4:40. Either way, Mary's story about a woman being in the passenger seat just makes no sense. Unless she's talking about the passenger seat of the truck, in which case it could be Leo's mother, because remember, Leo's father had felt sick, gone to bed, and Leo had left with his mother to go look for Michelle that night. But Mary's testimony makes it pretty clear that she's referencing the orange car and not the truck. So what we gather from Mary LaFoon's testimony is she must have been imagining a woman in the passenger seat of the orange car, or she's somehow mixing things up.
I was just going to say, if Leo did this, this is a true family affair. I mean, his family knows the truth, because I don't think Leo could have pulled this off by himself. Just because he had to dump the car, if nothing else. He needed somebody to pick him up, and his father and his mother provide his alibi. Look, not saying that's not possible, not saying that that couldn't happen. It's just, I think that's just a fact. If Leo did it, the rest of his family is in on it.
So whatever you think about these testimonies, it's clear that the LaFoons are critical witnesses. They seem to confirm the prosecution's entire case. Leo killed Michelle, and his father helped him dispose of the body. But there is a huge problem with the LaFoons, even though their testimony seems a slam dunk for the prosecution. You see, the LaFoon story about seeing the vehicles didn't come out until May of 1988, which is nearly 15 months after the murder. It was first documented in a report by Officer Weeks of a meeting with the LaFoons and someone you may find familiar, Alice Scott, that took place on May 18th, 1988. To say the least, that is an issue, because this is a very, very critical piece of testimony that doesn't come out for a year and a half. Now, the other problem is it isn't really clear why the LaFoons would be seeing what they're seeing. Why would the car be parked on the side of 33? The body was dumped down a dirt road, and there were tire tracks near Michelle's blood. Even in kind of these grainy, poor pictures that were taken 30 years ago, you can see these tire tracks. Whoever dumped Michelle's body didn't carry her down the dirt road from 33 to where the body was dumped. They did it there, on that dirt road. So either these two are hanging around where anyone can see them with a body still in the car for anyone driving by to be able to see them, or they've brought the car back out after dumping the body and are trying to decide what to do with it rather than getting away from the scene as quickly as they could. Now, both of these are possible scenarios, but it certainly is unusual based on what's going on here. Because you'd have to believe, essentially, that Leo Jr. has murdered Michelle, killed her on the dirt road, or driven her to the dirt road. Whatever. We know that she wasn't carried. There's not drag marks and chains strewn from where the car is on 33 all the way to where she was dumped miles away. We know that the car was where she was dumped at some point, or tire marks were there at some point. And if you've gotten away with it and you're kind of in this like secluded dirt road area where teenagers go to get high, have sex, etc., why would you then drive out into the open with multiple cars and kind of sit around and decide what your plan is in the open as opposed to on the dirt road where no one could see you?
Yeah, and the other possibility is the LaFoons are actually seeing where the car was dumped. Remember, they're driving around, they're doing this whole coin-operated newspaper thing, and maybe they're just a little off on the location. And if this was the dumping of the car and not the body, it's possible they didn't actually see Leo and his father, but rather some passersby who maybe stopped to check on the abandoned car and then left, and nobody ever heard from them again. Now, you may be thinking, look, okay, so it took them 15 months to talk to the police, but before we're saying they're lying or seriously misremembering, maybe that was just, they didn't know about the murders till then, so they didn't realize that they should share this information with police, and then voila, they come forward like good citizens. Well, the problem with that is, well, it might have taken them 15 months to tell the story for the first time, the one that they told at trial. That wasn't the first time they had talked to the police. In fact, Randy had talked to the police on July 20th, 1987, so just shortly after the murders. And he had told police that he knew Leo. These weren't strangers to Leo, and that he knew that Leo beat his wife. But he didn't see anything that day. Didn't have anything to add. Now, he would say that he saw Leo and another man at Leo's house the day after Michelle went missing. And he'd also say that he had heard that Leo had been bragging at the local bar about killing Michelle. He is the only person who shares this anecdote, by the way. So it's not as if he didn't want to be involved, or he didn't know Leo, or didn't want to say anything negative about Leo. But somehow, despite sharing those two anecdotes, he forgot seeing Leo, his father, the truck, and the car at the site of the body dump until 15 months later. Now, you might be wondering, how exactly did the police find the LaFoons? Did they just come forward of their own accord? Well, enter, once again, Alice Scott. In fact, the LaFoons actually lived behind Alice Scott. And on June 15th, 1987, so 5 days before the police initially talked to Randy, Alice spoke to detectives, and she told them that the LaFoons had seen the blue pickup truck and the orange car, but not at the dump location. She told them that they had seen those two vehicles in the driveway of Leo and Michelle's trailer, which is obviously inconsistent with everything that we've heard up until this point, including from Alice Scott. And it's also inconsistent with what the LaFoons would say many months later. At the time, Scott told police that the LaFoons didn't want to be involved, and that's how they got onto them and had that interview with them 5 days later. The LaFoons are a mystery. I mean, they are... When you first hear them, you think this is critical information. Like this is one of the hardest things to get past. And this is the key to the whole case. I mean, they've seen the Mazda. We keep calling it a Nissan, but it's a Mazda. They've seen the Mazda. They saw the blue truck. They saw two men, one of whom looks like Leo, at the dump site. Voila, right? We've got it all together. But then you start looking into it more, and it's just all of a sudden, it's like, what is going on with these people? And it's really hard to decide what you're going to believe about them or not believe, and why it took so long. And this strange story that Alice Scott tells. And you begin to think, did they just see the blue car, the blue truck, and the orange car at the trailer at some other time? And somehow this gets transposed into with the body dump? But that seems pretty extreme. This is not like a lot of things we talk about where, well, maybe you got your days wrong. I mean, this is a huge discrepancy. If they didn't see what they saw, then it's hard to say it's anything other than just a creation out of whole cloth. And I don't know why they would do that.
Yeah, I mean, it's hard to tie this to any sort of misremembering because it's such a completely different story, and especially because it's 15 months after. I'm not saying the LaFoons necessarily made it up, but it is very interesting that they live right behind Alice Scott. And Alice Scott so far has appeared probably more in this story than just about anyone other than Michelle and Leo Jr. So Alice Scott has inserted herself a lot in this investigation. We've talked about this. Whatever the motivations, I think it's clear that she wants to be helpful and she wants to be someone who knows everything. The problem is she probably doesn't know everything. She doesn't know what happens in that trailer. She is not personal friends with Leo and Michelle. But when this murder happens, and now we're 15 months removed, she probably talks to everyone around her, including the LaFoons. And she probably has a very active imagination. And 15 months later, after the LaFoons may have heard what Alice Scott thinks happened, even if at one point they're like, that's absolutely not happened, it begins to revise their memory of what could happen. We've said this so many times before. Witnesses' memories degrade, even in the most perfect of situations where they made a report to the police as soon as the event happened, and then they have that report to look back on, and there's no one talking to them about alternate situations, and they're not clouded by what's happening in the media, what's being reported on. They haven't spoken to any other witnesses. Best case scenario, their memories fade. But in reality, when you have other people who have their own memories of what happened during that event talking to you, a lot of reports coming in and out, you begin to doubt what you think is real. 15 months later is forever in terms of memories of witnesses. And so the fact that they did talk to police before and they did not think highly of Leo, at least Randy didn't think highly of Leo, didn't seem like he was afraid of Leo and would have been perfectly fine throwing Leo under the bus for Michelle's murder if he had any reason to believe that he had anything to do with it other than this kind of vague bragging in a bar. It seems like Randy would have said something 15 months earlier. So this is not a great witness for the prosecution either.
I mean, I would say, I wish somebody would talk to the LaFoons again. I don't know if they're still alive. I don't know if they're willing to talk. Because if the LaFoons are wrong about this, I would just be curious to hear what they say. Whether they stand behind this 100% or not. I don't, as Alice has said, we always hate to just ascribe lying to people and just say they're, just straight up lying for no reason. I think there's a couple possibilities. One is that they were mistaken. One is they got talked into this and maybe even were convinced that Michelle had been murdered by Leo and they could be the witnesses who helped bring her justice. They wouldn't be the first people who did something like that. That happens. You see it happen with law enforcement officers sometimes. Some of these cases with the corrupt law enforcement testimony, it's because the officer believes for whatever reason the person's guilty and is willing to stretch the truth to seal the deal. But this is pretty big. If they're lying about this, this is pretty big. I think the LaFoons, despite the fact that it was 15 months later, I mean, number one, I think as we're sort of going through jury psychology, I think the jury is primed to believe them despite the 15-month delay. And this is one of the few pieces of evidence, we're going to talk about the other one later, that directly connects Leo to Michelle's murder. And it's direct evidence, and everybody loves direct evidence, right? We got witnesses. But I don't know. I am really curious about the LaFoons. I would like to know more. I would like to know if there's been more investigation into them. I don't know exactly what to make of this. Though if they're telling the truth and are accurate in what they're saying, I think that's a pretty big nail in Leo's coffin if that's the case.
Yeah, and one other thing that we haven't really focused on, the first time that the LaFoons tell the story, it's in a meeting with Alice Scott. That's kind of unusual. I mean, it's not unusual, I guess, if the police is just talking to someone, but when you're in an investigation, we separate our witnesses all the time for this exact reason. Not necessarily that the LaFoons even knew they were under any sort of influence by Alice Scott, but you can imagine if you know your neighbor who you see on a day-to-day basis thinks something happened very, very, very variously, and you're about to tell the police something that is slightly differs from how your neighbor, who you have to see every single day when you walk your dog, when you take out your trash, everything, you're going to say something that's really going to upset them. You might not say it, right? And so we even have situations where like an adult child and their parent will come in, and we ask the parent to step out from their adult child's interview because there are kind of levels of influence that we may not know. And we want that particular witness's testimony, because when you're called to the stand, you don't get to go with your buddy. You don't get to go with your husband, your wife. The only thing you can probably take, which I've seen before, is your emotional support dog. But you do have to kind of litigate that issue first. But no other human goes up with you to testify on the stand. And because of that, it's always my practice to separate my witnesses for purposes of them giving a testimony for a report. And one other thing here. I think you're beginning to see, this is a very good case for it, why investigations are so much easier to be criticized on the outside than to actually conduct it correctly and to conduct it well. Because you're all asking, who's this Alice Scott character? Why wasn't there more investigation into her? Who are the LaFoons? Can someone go investigate who the LaFoons are? What motives do they have? Do you see how all of these witnesses, you have to kind of do your own investigations into all of them? But really the investigation here is into who murdered Michelle. And oftentimes when we are doing these investigations that are wide ranging with a lot of witnesses, you don't have the resources or the ability to do this like deep dive into every single witness unless you're given some reason to kind of question the veracity of a particular witness. But like, this isn't a trial about Alice Scott. Why does she care so much about the Schofields? It's not about her. It's not even about the LaFoons. But you can see how much you investigate into each of them is part of your overall investigation, and also how you can't investigate every single lead into every single witness.
And you can imagine how if you're the prosecutor and you really think Leo Schofield's guilty and somebody gives you this, maybe you don't ask too many questions. Maybe you don't question the inconsistencies. You're just like, okay, sounds good. See you trial. And then you just move on. That's one of those things we talk about a lot when it comes to police and prosecutors, the tunnel vision, the ability to just allow yourself to be so wrapped up in proving your case that you don't see the flaws. I mean, the LaFoons, they may be entirely accurate, but these were questions that should have been asked. They should have gotten to the bottom of this. Like, why this took so long? Why the inconsistencies? Why didn't you mention this before? Because certainly on cross-examination, these things are brought up. But, we talk about sometimes it's a prosecutor's obligation first to make sure you're not putting on bad evidence before the defense attorney does their thing, because cross-examination can only be so effective. There's two sides to this coin. Number one, it can only be so effective, and you don't want to put up bad evidence because you don't want a bad verdict. That's the first thing. The second thing, sometimes cross-examination is really effective, so you don't want to put up bad evidence when the guy's actually guilty, have that be torn apart by a good defense attorney, and then all of a sudden the jury has doubt when they shouldn't have doubt. Like Thurman Toole, if he were all they had and they put him up, he's the kind of witness who could get just absolutely ripped apart to the point that the jury's like, I don't know what to believe anymore. But this is not going to be the last time we talk about Alice Scott and the LaFoons, but it's one of those things that I think you can't talk about too much because their accuracy is so important.
With that, those are things you kind of can't test other than asking follow-up questions. But let's talk about some of the physical evidence we do have. One of that is Michelle's jacket. Now, her jacket wasn't on her body when she was found. It was actually on the ground near where all the change from her pocket was found. Now, it had stab slashes in it and was soaked in blood, which suggests that she was actually wearing the jacket, at least in part, when she was being stabbed. Now, this is really interesting because if she had arrived home and then was killed, then the murder would have happened at a time before she took off her jacket. Now, it's possible she never takes off her jacket. It is February. It's a little bit cool. But typically, the first thing you do when you get home, at least for me, is to take off my outer coat and then proceed. So it seems like if she had been at home, like the prosecution said, then she was ambushed before she could feed her dog, which we know she did, for example. So this challenges at least a little bit of where she may have been when she was murdered.
And this question, when we get really into the fine details of the timeline, when we talk about Alice Scott, this actually becomes really important about why she's still wearing her jacket and how it fits with everything else in the timeline. So remember this, that she still had her jacket on when she was stabbed.
Right. So we'll come back to that. There's also other physical evidence in this case. You would actually think there's a lot of physical evidence because it was such a personal and close murder. But this next part might get you very angry. There were 6 hairs found on Michelle's body that did not belong to her. And they were collected by evidence, but they were never examined. Now, this was not a Brady violation or any sort of a, late found out sort of evidence by the defense, because the defense was actually made aware of the fact that there were these 6 hairs that were not Michelle's. But in a very curious kind of plan, the defense never requested that these 6 hairs be tested. And trial happened. The hairs were never talked about. Nothing really ever happened with these hairs. They were just disposed of. And Florida basically says that this was just routine evidence disposal. You can imagine investigations, especially ones that are 30 years old, a lot of evidence is collected in them, and they sit in like storage holding cells for not perpetuity because the state doesn't have unlimited resources to hold these evidences. And so when there's a conviction and there's some amount of time, the evidence is typically destroyed. Now, this really stinks because those 6 hairs could say a lot. It is very unlikely this murder happened without the killer transferring some part of himself onto Michelle.
We face evidence disposal questions sometimes. I get calls from agents all the time who ask me whether or not we can dispose of evidence. And the way we normally look at it is how much time has passed. Are the direct appeals over? Are the habeas actions over? And if they are, a lot of times we say, yeah, go ahead and dispose of it. And if it's some later date, for some reason that person got a new trial, that would just be a problem for us. We probably would just go ahead and dismiss it. Evidence disposal happens, particularly when you have stuff that wasn't really contested. So if you look at the actual evidence that was entered into the trial, you can go look at that right now. I know Gilbert King went down and looked at a lot of this evidence. But the stuff that's not contested, at some point, it just gets thrown away. The fact that the defense attorney never did anything with this evidence was a huge mistake. Now, look, it's 1987. Don't have a whole lot of DNA at the time. Maybe they just didn't think, what's the value of these? They don't really match anybody. What's the point? Maybe if they had known about DNA, they would have kept them. There is a lot of contention over these hairs because Leo Schofield's team will tell you they were in the process of asking for these things to be tested when they were destroyed. Florida will tell you, oh, well, we were just following the normal disposal schedule for sort of non-contested stuff. But I think it's hard to get past this, and you can understand why people were so upset by this. You wish that there had been an opportunity to test this. Okay, well, the last thing I'll say on that, and then the rest of y'all can listen to the final recording and hear my brilliance on the other part. The standard for that, when you claim that evidence was destroyed, you have to show it's destroyed maliciously. I mean, it's a really high standard because courts recognize evidence is disposed of all the time, and every time it's disposed of, somebody's going to say, that was the one piece of evidence that would have proven I was innocent. So you have to basically show this was done intentionally with malice to prevent you from being able to show your innocence. That was litigated in this case and was not successful. So the hairs are gone, regardless.
Stinks, especially in a case like this.
Did you know that parents rank financial literacy as the #1 most difficult life skill to teach? Meet Greenlight, the debit card and money app for families. With Greenlight, you can send money to kids quickly, set up chores, automate allowance, and keep an eye on your kids' spending with real-time notifications. Kids learn to earn, save, and spend wisely, and parents can rest easy knowing their kids are learning about money with guardrails in place. Try Greenlight risk-free today at greenlight.com/Wondery.
Ryan Reynolds here from Mint Mobile with a message for everyone paying big wireless way too much. Please, for the love of everything good in this world, stop. With Mint, you can get premium wireless for just $15 a month. Of course, if you enjoy overpaying, no judgments, but that's weird. Okay, one judgment. Anyway, give it a try at mintmobile.com/switch.
Upfront payment of $45 for 3-month plan, equivalent to $15 per month required. Intro rate first 3 months only, then full price plan options available. Taxes and fees extra. See full terms at mintmobile.com.
Bombas makes the most comfortable socks, underwear, and T-shirts.
Warning, Bombas are so absurdly comfortable you may throw out all your other clothes.
Sorry, do we legally have to say that?
No, this is just how I talk, and I really love my Bombas.
They do feel that good. And they do good, too. One item purchased equals one item donated.
To feel good and do good, go to bombas.com/Wondery and use code WONDERY for 20% off your first purchase. That's BOMBAS.com/Wondery and use code WONDERY at checkout.
There are developments later on this case that we'll obviously cover that didn't come until many years later, and you wish you still had that evidence. But Brett's right. It is very routine for us after a period of time, after all legal recourse has been exhausted, that you do dispose of evidence. I had this one case where they had to seize like a bunch of boutiques, like women's boutiques, clothing and all the tchotchkes that you sell at a boutique. And my agents hated me because they were like, how much longer do we have to hold onto these wigs? And I was like, forever. We are still litigating. And so it really is an actual cost on the law enforcement officers because they have to pay for the storage and pay for the space. And you, as long as you have the evidence, you have to do all the proper documentation, which is a lot of administrative work as well. Stinks in this case, but just know, I don't think they were trying to cover up anything here. This is routine. Whether that should be routine or not might be another question. Okay. Now let's focus a little bit more on the blood. The blood we've talked about already from the 26 stab wounds. Now, where the blood is located is very important to tell where the murder happened, because we know that dead bodies don't actively bleed because you need the heart to be pumping to push out blood from your wounds. Now, obviously, a bloody body can leave blood behind. So if you're already dead and it was a very gruesome murder and there's blood on you, if you're being dragged on the ground, yes, you'll leave blood behind. But if the heart isn't beating, there actually won't be as much blood as one might expect. You know, I started today's episode talking about how I had sliced my finger open while making dinner tonight. That was kind of a joke, but it really does hurt a lot. And it bled a lot because my heart's pumping and it's constantly pushing blood throughout my body. And so when I have a small cut, it's going to push a lot of blood out. If your heart's not pumping, actually that blood isn't going to be coursing out. And what we do know from testimony at trial is that the scene of where the body was dumped was incredibly bloody. You can see pictures of these yourself. There were multiple spots of blood along the path to where the body was dumped and where Michelle was likely dragged. There are photographs that show an obvious large amount of blood present at the dump site. So what you're looking at is like a literal dirt road with kind of patches of green grass and unmistakable globs of blood on the ground. And obviously she wasn't found for several days, and still this blood was very present to the naked eye. Looking at this picture, it's unmistakable to me that this is blood, even if I'm walking by and don't know that there's a dead body close by. On cross-examination, now one of the investigators acknowledged that this indicated that bleeding was happening at the dump site. There was a lot of blood. Like I said, someone walking by would notice it. And something that you can see from the photographs is it appears that the bloodstains were actually on top of tire marks. This would be significant because it would seem to indicate that the vehicle arrived first, then the bleeding.
It's also interesting because this is basically a dry dirt road. And even 2 days after she was killed, there is still a lot of blood visible. It's not like they found her right after her death. It seems like there was just a lot of blood on this road. Whatever that means, it seems, to me at least, significant, and it makes you question the prosecution's story. Now, just because the prosecution's story is wrong doesn't mean that Leo's innocent. We've been down that road before. But it just makes you wonder, how could Michelle have been murdered at the trailer if there's so much blood at the dump site? And this becomes even more critical as we continue to walk through the evidence. Let's talk about the car for a second. So a Mazda technician testified about the car. He said it was not in running condition when it was found. The flex plate, he called it a flywheel, But that's not correct because it was an automatic, not a stick shift. Stick shifts have flywheels, automatics have flex plates. So it was a flex plate, basically the same thing. They had come apart, which would have resulted in the car not restarting after it had been shut off, according to him. So if you turn off the car, you try to turn it back on, it wouldn't turn back on. It also would have made a lot of noise while you were driving it before it shut down. This is important for a couple reasons, because Alice Scott, despite saying she heard the fighting between Leo and Michelle and heard lots of things, did not say, and when she was asked on cross-examination about it, did not say that she heard any noise from the vehicle. So that means whatever happened to this part of the car, the damage, because it wouldn't restart and given the noise, had to have happened after the body was dumped. Remember, the car is found sort of north on the interstate heading away from the site of the body dump and apparently just broke down there. In addition to problems with the flex plate, the radiator was almost bone dry. It should have held about 2 gallons of liquid. There was only a pint in it, and this is the kind of situation that could have caused it to overheat. So there are a couple different things that could have made this car break down when it did. The police inventoried the car, didn't notice any blood. We'll talk about a few places where blood was found in the car later on.
Just because if I'm wondering it, I bet there are a lot of people wondering it. I don't understand flex plates and flywheels and whatnot, and I know you said that it's important that an automatic has a flex plate. I also remember earlier on the police saying when they found the orange car, they couldn't move it out of drive in order to move it. So what does the flex plate have to do with that, and how does it break? Like, what do you mean when it breaks? Like, what does it mean to have the flex plate be broken in a way that it's not in working condition?
So I have a lot more to say about this later on because I actually think this is pretty significant. But essentially, look, I'm not a car guy, so car people out there, correct me for all the ways I get this wrong. But essentially, the flywheel and the flex plate are used to transfer energy from the transmission to the vehicle in a way that it makes it smooth, the operation of the car smooth. And, you know, if you have a stick shift and you've got a flywheel, the flywheel is doing all sorts of stuff, including keeping the car in gear and all these other things. The flywheel can be various different sizes, but they're usually pretty significant. They can come apart for various reasons. Slamming down the gas, like screeching off, having a lead foot, that kind of thing, that can damage it. Sort of hitting different things can damage it. The flex plate is a little different. Number one, it's much smaller, it's much thinner. It is sort of bolted onto the transmission, but it also does essentially the same thing as a flywheel. There's a reason the Mazda technician got it wrong. In fact, to this day, people who do high performance vehicles often call a flex plate a flywheel. All sorts of engines that aren't automatic transmissions have flywheels. In any event, it is a part of the transmission of the car that if it breaks, you're going to have issues. The car is going to stop eventually. And when it does, you're not going to be able to start it again. So that's important because it's not one of those things that typically happens just from regular wear and tear. So it's not like most of the time you're not just driving along and all of a sudden your flywheel breaks or your flex plate breaks. That's not the kind of thing that happens. Something had to have happened to the vehicle to cause this problem. And so when you're working through the story of that night and you're thinking about, so Leo, he murders Michelle, he puts her in the back of the car, he drives off, he dumps her, he then drives off to dump the car somewhere. Something had to have happened along the way that would have made this rather unusual thing happen to the vehicle, because this is not a common problem that you're going to have either in automatics or standard transmissions.
And thank you. I know there's more to talk about it, but that is very helpful for me to have in mind right now, that this isn't just from wear and tear, that this is very unusual, so unusual that the people who are called to tow the car can't figure it out, right? They see all manners of breakdowns, and they typically can figure out how to move the car on these breakdowns, but this is quite unusual. And also something we've said in a previous episode, I think, is coming to bear fruit right here, which is that whoever dumped the car here didn't choose to dump it here. It sounds like the car decided it was done and that was it. And it is where it is because The car could no longer move, and there was nothing the person driving it or any of the tow truck people could figure out how to change what was happening to the car in order to move it. So now let's talk about Michelle. The first thing I think about when a woman is so brutally murdered is it for sex? Is it for money? Is it a robbery? We already know that there wasn't evidence of sexual assault, but what about money? What if she met with someone who wanted to rob her? And this brings us to Michelle's wallet and purse, which interestingly were at home, leading the prosecutor, John Aguero, to state that she must have returned home. His story, of course, was that this was right before Leo killed her. But here's the thing. It's undisputed that Michelle did return home after getting off work. We know this because she told Leo she was going to do this, or she told Leo she did this. She went to feed the dog after work, and her purse and wallet were left at the house. Really isn't necessarily that big of a deal because, well, you might be thinking, of course it's a big deal. Would she really drive without her wallet, which probably has her license in it? But that's the thing. Michelle didn't have a license, and her driving this car in general was always kind of a risky sort of thing. Remember when she first went missing and Leo called around to the jails to see if maybe she was picked up by a police officer for driving without a license and was just sitting in a prison cell somewhere? And that's because she didn't have a license. And as Leo's defense attorney, Jack Edmond, would note in closing argument, of all the people who testified at trial who knew Michelle, and there were really a lot of them, none testified that Michelle was in the habit of carrying her wallet and purse with her, even on short trips such as the one to pick up Leo. This also makes a lot of sense because not only does she not have a license, so there's no real need to carry around her wallet, they didn't have that much money, right? They had like just enough money to get like $3 of gas, and that's it. So she didn't carry around like lots of credit cards and insurance cards and all these things. She didn't have those things. She typically left these things at home. So even though the prosecution kind of hounded on the fact that her wallet and purse are at home means that she was home, that may be true for some people, maybe even most people. But what we know about Michelle from people who knew her testifying is that it is completely the ordinary that she would leave her wallet and purse at home. For me, I always take those things with me. Partly because we now have smartphones and, I don't know how to go anywhere without my smartphone. But not the case with Michelle.
And I think Edmund makes a really good point because the prosecution hits on this. I mean, this is a piece of evidence they think significant, the fact that her wallet and her purse are left behind. And I think they're playing on people just, people do this all the time, right? Like, what would I do? Well, I would take it with me. So the fact that it's there means something must have happened. And we talk about this sometimes. We're talking about cases where, there was that one case where someone left a note. And we talked about, it would be great to know, is that something she always did? Because if it's not something she always did, then it's going to be much more significant. The prosecution knew this was important. They knew they were going to hit on it. They called all these witnesses. All they would have had to have done is ask one of them, did she always take her wallet and her purse with her? There's probably a reason they didn't ask that, because they knew what the answer would be, and they knew it wouldn't necessarily be good for them. So they didn't ask it. Jack Edmond didn't know what the answer would be, so he didn't ask it either, so in the hopes that he could use this in closing. And when he gets to closing, all these witnesses have testified, none of them have been asked, and so he gets to make this point. Why did no one testify that she takes it with her all the time, if she did? And if it was her habit to leave it behind, then it's not significant. It's just, as everyone agrees, Leo agrees that she went home before she called him. Everyone agrees that happened. She definitely went back to that trailer at least once, twice if Leo killed her, once if he didn't. Either way, there was an opportunity for her to leave her purse and her wallet there. Which brings us to her shoes. So if you remember back when we talked about the autopsy, Michelle was found with no shoes on. Leo told the police that the high-top tennis shoes she wore to work were at home. Leo speculated that she was wearing her red leather flats, which were not at home. Of course, the prosecution and those who think Leo killed Michelle say that she took her shoes off at home, he murdered her, and that's why she had no shoes. He didn't think to take the shoes with him, he just takes her barefoot. But there's a couple problems with that. Number one, the red leather flats do appear to be missing. Nobody ever found them. And number two, the jacket, which we mentioned before. Her jacket was at the scene of the crime, and she was also wearing her work uniform. So if Leo killed her, he did it after she took her shoes off, but no other clothes, including her jacket. Now, that's certainly possible, but it strikes you as a little strange. But there's another issue. Maybe she didn't change her shoes at all. When another waitress at Tom's restaurant was interviewed by the police, she said that Michelle had been wearing her, quote, red jelly shoes the night of the murder. So it is likely that her shoes just ended up in that canal and kind of floated away, whoever killed her. But the fact that she wasn't wearing shoes when she shows up at the canal doesn't prove anything about who did it.
Yeah, I think these are all interesting things to say, but I think with the shoes and the jacket, you can see how both sides can argue their perspective, but it's hard to say here. I do think it's very interesting that the waitress who was with Michelle that night remembers red shoes. You know, maybe they misremembered. Maybe that was something she wore sometimes, not other times. I do think it's interesting that you would wait tables with open-toed shoes. Oftentimes restaurants will have regulations against having open-toed shoes if you work in a restaurant serving, because obviously there's liability with dropping hot foods, sharp objects onto your toes. But then again, this is the 80s and probably fewer regulations. So if this waitress remembers seeing red shoes, it may have very well been that she was wearing red shoes, because that is at least a distinctive color to remember for that night.
I'm going to go out on a limb and say that Tom's Diner wasn't the most well-regulated restaurant in the world either.
I was trying to give an argument as to this waitress misremembering. But the thing is, there's no indication this waitress was like a friend of Michelle's and hung out with Michelle at other times other than at work. And so how would she remember that there were red shoes that Michelle wore, unless Michelle did wear them to the restaurant at some point? So if she remembers them, may have been the wrong day, but it seems like at least her red jelly shoes were something that Michelle at times wore to the restaurant. All of this, who knows, right? Because you can imagine that it's kind of like you could have your shoes on and your jacket on when you get home and get ambushed, attacked, and murdered at home. Or you could get home, take off your shoes because your feet hurt from a day of work, and get murdered. I mean, we're really having to draw all these tenuous lines as to what these pieces of evidence mean, when the big pieces of evidence, like where the blood is, where the car is, where is blood not, what do those hairs say? I think that is where I would focus my attention as opposed to on kind of these other things.
Okay, well, we're going to go ahead and stop for now. We're going to get really bloody next episode and talk a lot about the blood and where it was found and where it wasn't found and why that's significant. And we're going to talk a lot about Alice Scott. We've been talking about Alice Scott for all these episodes, and we're finally going to talk about what Alice Scott actually had to say when she got up on the stand and why it's so significant. If you think the Laffoons are important because they saw people maybe around where the body was dumped, they got nothing on Alice Scott. She is what ties this entire case together, and you're either going to believe her or you're not going to believe her. I mean, if you believe her, you're going to think Leo did it. If you don't believe her, Leo still might have done it, but at least it opens the door for you to think he is possibly innocent. Okay. That means we've reached what is quickly becoming my favorite part of the show, which are the questions that we answer. You know, we used to try and keep the shows under an hour, and now we do the questions like every show is like an hour and a half.
So far, maybe we would do an hour if it weren't the questions, but what that means is we're not shortchanging you the substantive episodes. We're just tagging on Q&A.
Exactly. So let's do some Q&A. If somehow you've missed it all the other times that we've done this, if you leave a 5-star review, either for this podcast or for Legal Briefs, if you leave a 5-star review and ask a question, we will do our very best to answer the question for you. So I feel like we've answered this question like 5 times, but it's an important question, so we'll answer it again. This is from Susie. Susie says, everyone has a bias. It's a normal part of human nature. How do you guys ensure your bias as prosecutors doesn't bleed into your coverage of cases? You know, I've been thinking about this a lot, actually, because I see people, you know, we talk about Bone Valley, and there's a lot of, you know, when we start talking about Bone Valley, there's a lot of criticism of Bone Valley. And I've said before that everybody has a bias. I've decided, I don't know, I feel like that is both true, but it comes across negatively. Like when people think of bias, they think of it is a negative thing. It's one of those words that now has a pejorative nature to it. It's kind of like discrimination. Like people with discriminatory taste, that used to be a good thing, and now it's a bad thing. You shouldn't discriminate against people, right? Like, so even if you're talking about taste, it's like a word you don't want to use. So what we often talk about is perspective. You know, everybody definitely has a perspective. It's informed by your life, what you do, how you come at things, what you've experienced before. It's the way you see the world. And I think what you see with podcasts and everything else, it can be an agenda. I don't think an agenda is necessarily a bad thing if it comes from the right place. Bone Valley, for instance, I don't think Bone Valley is biased. I think that is the wrong way to describe it. Just like I don't think we're biased. I think Bone Valley is a case where the producers of that show, Gilbert King, who has a perspective influenced by his time as a journalist reporting in Florida with an understanding of a lot of the problems that Florida has had. I mean, he won a Pulitzer Prize, not for this case, for a different case where there was an injustice, and he comes into it with a perspective. But I do think he looked at the case and he decided Leo Schofield was innocent, whether he is or not. That was the decision he came to. And when they did Bone Valley, the agenda they had was to present the case for Leo's evidence. And I don't think he hides that. You know, we talked to the creators of Not Making a Murderer, but
Convicting a Murderer, Sean Reck.
Convicting a Murderer, exactly, Sean Reck. And he said, we're coming at this from a certain angle. And people are going to see it as biased, but the reason we're doing it the way we're doing it is to present the opposite side of the story that Making a Murderer didn't tell. Now, maybe they're both wrong, but they have an agenda and they're sort of open about it. When I think of bias, at least the way we typically use the term, I think more of when you have a vested interest in the outcome. And that can come from perspective. It can come from an agenda. You can imagine once you decide Leo's innocent, and you're going to put on a podcast about how he's innocent, and you're going through the evidence about how he's innocent, maybe you come across something and you're like, that's not great for our story. And it leads you to leave it out, right? You can imagine how that would happen. But typically I think of bias as being some sort of, you know, if my kids were involved in something, got accused of something, I am biased towards them. Those of you who watched football a couple weeks ago, there was the Dallas Cowboys were playing the Detroit Lions. And there was just this absolutely awful call by the referees. Now, I don't care about the Dallas Cowboys or the Detroit Lions. So as soon as I saw it, I was like, well, they got that wrong. But it benefited the Dallas Cowboys. So I'm sure if you're a Cowboys fan, you're like, well, I don't know. I mean, it depends on how you look at it, right? Because you have sort of a vested interest. So I think when you have a vested interest, that kind of bias is really hard to keep it out of what you do because you care about it on an emotional level. I think when you just recognize sort of the perspective you have, it's a lot easier to moderate that. We know we're coming at this as prosecutors. It's in the bio. It's in the description of the podcast. So we know how we're coming at it. And I think the fact that we recognize that helps us to avoid allowing it to overcome our ability to look at these cases in a somewhat neutral way.
Yeah, I mean, that was so beautifully said, Brett. If you didn't listen to every word of that beautiful exposition, what he said that was very important is the vested interest part. I think bias is only a problem when you have a vested interest in the outcome. And here's the thing. When I prosecute cases, I don't have a vested interest because I have a greater vested interest, and that's not to get the issue wrong, both on like a moral level, but also very selfishly on a personal and professional level, because I don't want to be accused of ethics violations. I don't want to be potentially disbarred or be accused of prosecutorial misconduct. And so when I see a piece of evidence that is completely contrary to the narrative that I think is correct in my case, I personally do not brush it under the rug because I'm thinking, holy crap, that's going to come back and bite me in the rear, because I expect the other side to find it. I expect the judge to question me on it. I fully expect that to come to light at some point. And so you can call it completely selfish that I don't want to brush that underneath the rug. And so my greater vested interest is to have the right outcome, have the right person be convicted for the crime that I'm charging them of, and also be vested in the fact that I will continue to be able to practice law because I care about kind of the integrity of the profession. That's my profession. But when it comes to the podcast, I cannot say this enough. I have absolutely no vested interest in how these cases come out in terms of who is guilty or not guilty. And here's why. True crime, as you guys have all heard many times before, I don't like scary things, right? There are a lot of scary things I see in my life on a daily basis. There is horror in this world beyond anything you all could ever imagine. I know how scary this world is, so I actually don't find entertainment in the scary things in life. That's why I, steer clear of horror and a lot of like gory true crime sort of things. I am not litigating these cases. We are very clear that we don't cover cases that we personally work on or have any sort of, touching anything of our professional or personal lives for good reason, because we want to come at it with our perspective and our expertise, but without that vested interest. These cases, when they come to us and people say, can you cover so-and-so case? I may know that there's a conviction, but it's not like, man, if they don't come out guilty, the prosecutor brand shall suffer and we will lose all things. No. And that's why you'll see us cover a lot of cases where we think there's actual innocence, and we'll also call out when we think there's actual corruption, which we think is a lot less in reality than people allege. But we're not scared to say those things because this is not our profession. We're looking at it as commentators. We are not litigating these cases. What happens to Leo Schofield at the end of the day is not up to us at all. But what we can do is to look at all of the investigation, the records, the trial transcripts based on our experience to lend kind of our perspective of how we would view things and what we think the jury is thinking, what we think the litigants are thinking, what we think the judge is thinking, because we believe that the justice system is something that should be accessible to everyone. And so, I guess now it seems like I do get a little bit irked when people say we're biased, because I'm like, okay, biased because we have a perspective, but vested interest? No. Truly not. We are not getting paid to come out a certain way on any of these cases. In fact, there are probably a lot of people in a lot of the cases where they suggest us look at something and they would love for us to come out a certain way. And we look into it and we're like, oh my goodness, it is totally going against where this person who gave us all these resources wants to come out. And we just go where the evidence follows us, because at the end of the day, that's why we do this podcast. The second we start to change our perspective because it's being bought or affected by something other than the evidence and the truth, then you don't really need us, because you're going to get plenty of that in the media world.
I'll just say two things on that. Number one, what I like about the podcast is I get to find out the truth about these cases, because I feel like I only know the truth when we look into it. I'm not saying you have to feel that way, but I personally, until I have looked at it and looked at the records and looked at the transcript, I just don't know for sure. And it doesn't really matter what a bunch of other people have said. Like, I want to look at it myself. It's one reason we always tell you guys to do that, because that's just how we feel. So I like the podcast. One of the reasons is because all these cases that I've heard about for years and years, I now finally get to know the answer to, because I get to look at the evidence and reach a conclusion. And, the answer that I believe is true, whether maybe one day I'll change my mind or be proven wrong. So that's the first thing. And the second thing, I would think by now it's pretty obvious we're willing to come to conclusions that are not popular. So, if you think we're just giving you whatever we think's gonna spike the rankings the most and make us a bunch of friends, and that's clearly not the case. So
I can tell you this, Brett. Is there an amount of money that you could be paid by someone where they would write you the check where you would say Dyatlov Pass was an avalanche?
No. No circumstance in which
there you go. You guys got your answer.
People keep sending me these like articles where like these avalanche articles, and I'm just like, just roll my eyes. But the one other thing I'll say is Alice is right, and I've been talking about it as a podcast, but she brought up the professional side. She's 100% right. My bias is not losing my job, and that's much more important to me than any particular case. So I'm not going to be hiding evidence, number one. And number two, the way you can avoid bias there is you just turn over the evidence. You don't make the decision about whether or not it's important or it's exculpatory or it's admissible or anything else. You turn it over and you can fight that in a court. The judge can make the decision. And that way your particular bias isn't deciding the question. Like, you don't. That's the great thing about the law, is almost always the case. If you don't want to make the final call, you do not have to make the final call. You can always turn it over to a neutral arbiter. Okay, that was a long answer.
I got a fiery answer. Sorry, guys.
It's a fiery. Sorry. And I'm not just defensive of us. Like I said, I really enjoyed Bone Valley. Whether we're going to agree with the outcome or not, I enjoyed it. I don't actually think it's biased. I think they make very clear to the listener exactly what they're trying to do. And to me, even if that means they have an agenda, it just doesn't bother me in the same way, because it's not some sort of hidden personal whatever, like we were saying, vested interest or whatnot. Anyway, okay, let's do one more. Let's see if I can find one that's a little less. It
And then
won't
for
make
all the
Alice
people
so
who
aggressive.
stay to listen to us record ads, I have a really, really funny Brittany story that might be worth staying.
There you go. Okay, we've talked about this in some context, but I can't remember exactly what it was. What are your zodiac signs, and do you feel they align with your vibe?
We have talked about this, so I'm going to answer it slightly differently, because what I grew up with were not they're not even American zodiac signs. Western zodiac signs. We grew up with Chinese zodiac signs, the 12, zodiac animals. And I think this will surprise no one, but I'm a tiger. And I think I absolutely embody the spirit of a tiger. I am pretty hot. not physically. I am off the cuff, pretty fiery, shall we say.
There you go.
And I have been called feisty more than once in my life. So, and the zodiac animals, they obviously have the characteristics, wisdom or whatnot. But you also go a lot by what that animal's like. And let's just say I'm not a sheep.
So I was a rooster, and I think everybody will say that I align with the rooster and the rooster.
My brother's a rooster, and that's why we get along so well. Look at that.
There you go. Okay, well, we'll answer one more question, just in case we'd already talked too much about that, because I know we haven't done this one. What is your favorite fast food restaurant, and what is your order?
I mean, I know what yours is. Mine is obviously... Okay, so mine is Chick-fil-A, because it has saved me so many times with my kids. And this is going to be really embarrassing, because I'm going to say what my order is. When I'm alone, I get the 12 count nuggets, and I eat them all by myself. But I don't get fries. I just get all the nuggets. You actually know that, because we would go get Chick-fil-A a good bit together.
Yeah, because that was where I got you that Coke that made you so
and
mad.
I almost threw it in your face, because I'm a fiery tiger.
You're a fiery tiger. I think my favorite fast food restaurant, I mean, I do like Chick-fil-A a lot, but I think my actual favorite is it's sort of a local-ish restaurant. They have it in a few places, but I think it's mostly Alabama. Have you ever been to Guthrie's, Alice?
Yeah, there's one right by my house.
So I love Guthrie's. Guthrie's is a chicken finger place, for those of you who don't know. But it's been around for forever, since the 60s. So Zaxby's and Cane's and all these other places, frankly, basically copycats of Guthrie's. And so they have the chicken fingers and the orange sauce or whatever. Anyways, they have incredible sweet tea. I mean, it's the best sweet tea you've ever had. If you're from the South, that's very important. And then I love their chicken finger sandwich. Fantastic. So that's when I'm doing keto and I want to cheat, I go to Guthrie's and get a chicken finger sandwich and a massive, as big as I can get, sweet tea.
Okay, so not fast food though, but it is fast food, because now we had to do the not healthy version. But my favorite healthy-esque fast food is a newer one. It's not from childhood. It's Kava, which Brett also knows, because I force him to go with me way too often. He's always like, do we have to go to Kava again? So it used to be in I first knew about it in DC, because it was across the street from our house, and it's a Mediterranean, create your own bowl Chipotle style sort of place. But it was recently bought by an Alabama fast food restaurant, Zaxby's, right? Is that right?
Is it Zaxby's? I don't know.
There's another I think so. No, the other Mediterranean place in Alabama that just closed, close to us. Anyways.
Zoe's?
Zoe's? Yes, I think Zoe's bought them out of Birmingham. And I've been waiting for 5 years for them to open a Kava near me, and they finally did. And it's so good, y'all. If there's a Kava near you,
Kava's really good.
There's one in DCA. I like it so much that when I fly through DCA in DC, it's not near my gate ever because of the flights that I take, but I always walk to that gate, which is not close, get Kava, and then go into the city. Like, I don't even go to Kava in the city. I get it in the airport in order to go into the city.
Yeah, I love Kava. Kava's great. It really is good.
So yummy.
So good.
And they have some real heat. Like, their red pepper hummus is like, set your mouth on fire.
And then obviously the greatest drink that you can get from a fast food restaurant is the cherry limeade from Sonic.
From Sonic.
But the rest of Sonic's just kind of It's just
the
okay.
food is like fine. It's made
food is
for
fine.
after
It's
a football game, right?
Exactly. But the thing about Sonic, the cherry limeade and their milkshakes, great. If you're looking for something to drink, Sonic is for you. If you're looking for a chicken finger sandwich, you need to go to Guthrie's. So much better than Zaxby's. Sorry, Zaxby's. So much better than Zaxby's. So
It's true.
All right.
It's true. That was fun, y'all.
That was fun. Enjoyed that. Keep sending the questions in. We will keep answering them. Did I say who asked that question? I don't know if I said who.
No, you did not.
That was Valentine Girl. So thank you, Valentine Girl.
It's almost
for sending it in.
almost your time.
And just, I don't know if you've noticed, but we got a whole lot of questions. We tend to answer the fun ones much more quickly than the very serious ones that many of you send in. So I appreciate.
I don't know. I really
The
like
very
the people
serious
who
questions.
write like 5 pages asking for legal advice. I'm like,
Yeah.
good try.
We get the
We
legal
can give you
advice
legal
ones.
advice.
And then, we just get some really complicated questions. So
Yeah.
I'm always saving those for when we have the brain power to answer them after an episode. Okay. Well, I'm telling you, I know we always say this about this point in the episodes when doing these deep dives. I always say, we're getting there, guys. We'll be at the end before you know it. And you're all going to be sad when we get there. You don't think so. People love to complain. What's amazing is people love to complain about the deep dives. And then when they're over, they're like, y'all need to do another deep dive. So I'm getting so many mixed signals from you guys. I need some consistency. So shoot us an email and let us know. Are you enjoying this? Are you hating it? What case should we do next? Do you like the deep dives? Are you more of a one-off person or maybe a 2-episode person? I've really come to love the deep dives, so sorry if you like the 1 episodes. We try to mix them in. Let us know, prosecutorspod@gmail.com, @prosecutorspod for all your social media. We're here on YouTube, which is where we're recording right now, with our wonderful patrons. So if you are a patron, come join us. We love the chat. They make a lot of really funny comments. They help us to sort of flesh out these stories. It's amazing. Come be a part of it. We love recording with you guys. All right, Alice. Was there anything else you want to say before we sign off?
No, but come back. We are going to be diligent and we will stick to, 8 episodes.
We got a lot
Here we
to
go.
say.
We have a lot to say, and they may be
The
long
next
episodes,
episode
but we're here
is
for
going
it.
to be a lot of information is going to be packed in the next episode. So you're going to enjoy it. All right. Well, we'll be back with that next week. But until then, I'm Brett.
And I'm Alice.
And we are the prosecutors.
Are you there?
Okay. I don't know if I need
can
to
hear
get
you.
like a new connection
It-
that like from
I feel like
the
it's not
box to.
It doesn't feel like a technical issue. It feels like a software incompatibility issue.
It may be a software issue. I may need to
Because
download, like, a
it's
driver
like
or
it's
something.
not like your microphone doesn't work. It's that it changes it. But anyway.
Well, it's like it shorts. I don't know. I don't really know what's going on with it, but I should try and
Yeah.
figure that out at some point instead of just ignoring it and hoping it'll
I
go away.
mean, it's fine.
Okay.
Yes.
I don't know
really
how far we're
quick
gonna get
because
either,
these people are so nice for asking. You guys, kids are amazing. He was like down for the count. I'm talking like his face was against the sink as I washed throw up off of his face yesterday. Good move. Bouncing off the walls today. Bouncing off the walls. He's fine. So weird. But so thank you for asking. He's great.